Hello, I am Lloyd Hawkeye Robertson, president of the New Enlightenment Project. We provide education on the enduring qualities of reason and compassion that define humanism. Today, I'm pleased to interview British Columbia defense lawyer Jim Heler. Jim has been a member of the Maharaji cult, and before becoming a lawyer, he's practiced law in British Columbia since 1993. He's also concerned himself with broader legal and societal issues involving institutional overreach that includes cult-like control of language. Join us for what promises to be a lively discussion. Welcome, Jim. You're a seasoned criminal defense lawyer based in Victoria, British Columbia, with a career spanning over 3 decades. But at one time, you were an ashram primi with the Divine Light Mission, or sometimes known as the Maharaji cult.
Yeah.
What is an ashram primi, and what prompted you to study law after this experience?
But, thanks for asking that, Lloyd. I've talked to a few people over the last few months, and nobody's gone there. And I think that's a really great question to start this conversation, because I think it's relevant to kind of what's made me how I am and all of that. Well, okay, so Maharaji was a young teenage guru from India. He was quite notorious in the early 70s, and that's when I got involved. I was fairly young, very impressionable. It was the gestalt of the times, right? Everybody was looking for some sort of spiritual path or enlightenment. Not everybody, a lot of people. I sure was. And so I got into this, following this guru, and it's kind of fascinating, I think. Anyways, he claimed that he could give you 4 direct ways to experience God. That's the term he used. He didn't soft sell it. Directly. There are 4 meditation techniques. And that really appealed to me rationally, because I thought, if there's any merit to this, I'll just test it. It seemed almost scientific. So I went through the indoctrination process as I see it now, which is going to a lot of meetings and really cultivating this appetite for something that I was going to get. I eventually received the techniques and enjoyed them to some extent. I stayed in this group for about 8 or 9 years. The ashram was the inner core. The ashram was kind of the monastic order within the group. So there were people that followed Maharaji and they did the meditation, but they had families. Then there were other people like me that didn't have families, and we wanted to make this full 100% commitment. So I was kind of a monk for this guru. What's relevant about that to me now, that's kind of made me what I am, whatever that is that after I left, I didn't leave it alone, but I started a group of ex-followers. I started kind of the internet presence, the ex-premi following scene on the internet. And I stayed very interested in that until 9/11. 9/11 kind of changed my interest. I thought it wasn't that important, so I kind of drifted away from it. But the point is, I was interested. I felt like I'd been duped. It was very subtle. It was nuanced. I had to do a lot of learning about it. It kind of made me interested in the truth, and how I think I'm a fairly intelligent person, at least average intelligence, and yet I certainly got sucked in by this young teenage guru, and so that kind of helped shape me a little bit. And I don't know, that kind of led to me getting interested in being a lawyer, and it just all is part of the mix.
So you got the impression that, or you had the belief that lawyers have something to do with a search for truth?
That hurts, Lloyd. That really hurts.
Okay.
Conditionally, convenient truth, beneficial truth to my client.
Okay, well, we're going to get into some of your the issues that you've raised with the BC Law Society, but I had a fellow BC lawyer, Kerry Linda, on this program a while back, and he reported having difficulties with the BC Law Society even before he articled in Vancouver. Actually, it was in BC. It was a small center in BC where he articled. When did you first have difficulties with the Law Society?
Well, I wouldn't. Okay, so I guess there's a precedent to this current thing that's happening right now. So I'm suing the Law Society for defamation, and I think that's why we're talking. And there's a whole context to that. But before that, there was a chapter one, maybe this is perhaps chapter two. The Law Society has annual general meetings, and there's a procedure for lawyers to bring resolutions, and it only takes two lawyers to do so. So you don't need to have a whole giant contingent of people that share the same interests and same motivation on a particular issue. It could be just two people. And back in 2021, the Law Society, not the Law Society, the courts came down with these directives in British Columbia that suddenly everybody had to announce their gender pronouns when they introduced themselves in court, and I took issue with that because there are lots of reasons why. You could talk about this forever, and I think anybody now today can imagine all the different reasons someone might take issue with that. But just briefly, I thought that if nothing else, it was the kind of thing that we should have discussed. It's I mean, there are arguments that are being made in favor of the directions, and then there are a lot of concerns and arguments that could be made against it. But what happened was that the culture within the profession, both informally and certainly formally as well, in the literature of the profession, the British Columbia Journal, the Canadian national journals, in the courts themselves, they were suppressing that conversation. And I thought that was really terrible. First of all, they just sprung these directives on the profession without any discussion to begin with. And they're controversial, they're radical. I would think I'd argue all of that. I'm not shy about that. But like I say, we should discuss it. So I noticed that, and in fact, I was already in touch with a young woman who'd written this really thoughtful article for the British Columbia Advocate, which is like the local magazine for lawyers. And she wrote this article that was very critical about these directives, and she submitted it, and they were going to publish it. And the Advocate reached out to the advocates of these directives, the LGBTQ group. They're called SOGI, the Sexual Orientation Gender Identity Group. Reached out to them for a counter article. And I think that the editor of the Advocate thought this is going to be really good. It's going to be very fruitful, stimulating, important colloquy that he's going to host in his magazine. But the SOGI guys just wrote back to him and said, no way. We're not going to say anything. That's hate speech. What this woman has written, I don't think they'd even read it. Just the idea that she'd written anything critical at all of the directives, they castigated as hate speech, and they said, not only are we not going to contribute anything from our side, but if you go ahead and publish it, we're gonna get you. We're going to report you to the Human Rights Tribunal. Or maybe, I'd have to look. Maybe they didn't say that they would report, but that he's facing a human rights tribunal complaint, all sorts of stuff like that. So he got scared, the editor, and he didn't publish it. Fine. She then went to Canadian Lawyer Magazine, submitted the same article. They did publish it, only to then get a big open letter from 200 lawyers from across the country, including 3 benchers from our Law Society, threatening Canadian Lawyer Magazine. If you don't take down that article now, we're going to ruin you. And they really did threaten that. We're going to boycott you. No one's ever going to contribute anything to Canadian Lawyer. We're going to make sure that all of our friends across the country join suit. And that's the end of Canadian Lawyer. And so not only do we insist that you take that down, but that you replace it with an apology a groveling apology. And in fact, if you go to Canadian Lawyer right now, or to today, and you go to their opinion section, you go back to 2021, you will see this kind of vague apology for something. There's instead of the article, the apology still stands. We're very sorry that we posted this article. It was completely, beyond pale. So I saw that. I was friends now with this young woman, young lawyer, and I said, this is all wrong. So I wrote to the judges and I said, hey, you guys, I know that it's unusual for lawyers to write to you, but this is, it's not unheard of. And I think that you should really consider what's going on here. You've come down with these directives without a good, healthy discussion in the profession, and it's not good. People are going to not respect the directives. I think I said that some people they're not going to follow them. We should have a healthy discussion. The judges wrote back to me and said, thanks very much, but don't ever write us again. We're very happy with the advice we got. And that's the end of it. So, sorry, this is a long story. But anyways, what happened is that she and I then brought a resolution to the Law Society. Thought we can do this. And the resolution was simply to affirm a principle that we're lawyers. We talk about stuff. We're not academics like you, but we kind of do something similar. It's an analog of that. We discuss things. We debate them. There's serious issues. Obviously, the most serious issues in society get vetted by our profession. And so we brought a resolution saying that just to affirm the principle that we should have this discussion. Well, we didn't win. We came very close. I think we got like about 44.5% of the vote. All of the woke agencies within the law and the CBC, they totally denounced us then. But nonetheless, we did really well. And that was that. So that's my history with the Law Society. So that's where I was disappointed. I considered the Law Society to be it wasn't healthy that people weren't happy to affirm that principle, but I was heartened by the fact that at least about half of the lawyers did, and that was it. I don't have any bad history with the Law Society otherwise, but then in this case, I'll tell you what happened here. Should I just keep going? I'll tell you what happened.
Well, okay. Let me interject here and do my thing and ask questions. Yeah, we had Shadden Farsai on this. I interviewed her when that happened a couple of years ago, and yes, it was a mobbing, and we can call it a woke mobbing. It's like they have a bit of an establishment. So what we have established, what you have established, in answer to my last question, then, is there is a bit of a history there. They know who you are, and that might help explain what happened next. What happened when you gave them what I would consider a friendly amendment, suggesting that instead of saying that there were bodies at this apple orchard near Kamloops, near the old Indian Residential School, you said potential bodies. That seems like a pretty innocuous amendment to me. And tell us what happened next.
Sure. Okay, so in this case, one could argue, and some of the criticism that I got in that earlier thing about the pronouns, the gender pronouns, was that this isn't the Law Society's business. They're not the ones that came down with these directives. They can't even control it. It's the courts. And that, in a way, is fair criticism. This was different. The Law Society itself has taken it upon itself to have an Indigenous intercultural course that's mandatory for all lawyers. We all have to take it. The Law Society generates it and they control it. And within that course, in that training, they have the false claim that there have been the bodies of 215 children found in clandestine graves outside the old Kamloops Residential School. And it shouldn't, if that surprises anybody, that it shouldn't, because the First Nations have known that and been saying that all along. So those two things together. So this is the Law Society telling lawyers this. Now, why is that important? What happened was there was a woman, she was Indigenous. She went to court to be sentenced for contempt of court for being a pipeline protester. And her lawyer at that sentencing started talking about the bodies of the 215 kids that had been unearthed outside of Kamloops. And the judge um, rightfully so, pushed back on me. Well, really? The judge probably scratching your head there. Did I miss something? Is there some big news article that I didn't catch that they actually unearthed these bodies? But in fact, the judge said, well, they haven't really. I mean, they're potential graves. It's not the right way to look at it. So she's going back and forth with the lawyer at the sentencing. At that point, when she settles on potential, that they should be called potential, which is, I think, totally fair. It's a claim, but it's not confirmed. The gallery, all of the supporters of this woman that was being sentenced, erupted. And they started calling the judge names, calling her a racist, a denialist, that kind of thing. Sheriffs had to sweep them out of the courtroom. So I didn't hear about that back then. But what I did see was that that lawyer and the client weren't satisfied with just the small sentence that she got for contempt of court, but instead he went to the Court of Appeal. And he argued that all over again, or he argued that the judge basically taking up the criticism of the crowd, of the mob in a sense, he argued to the Court of Appeal that that judge was biased. I don't, maybe he argued that she was a denialist. I don't think that he said racist. I've actually seen his statement of argument. But anyways, he was arguing that she was biased. And the Court of Appeal looked very closely at what happened there in the court below. And fortunately, the Court of Appeal has 3 judges. And the judge that wrote the decision happened to be the chief judge of British Columbia. And he happens to be Indigenous, and he happens to be from Kamloops. You couldn't have gotten a better person to preside over this panel. His name is Len Marchand. And Justice Marchand wrote a very careful opinion saying, look, all that judge was saying was basically what the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission itself says. It qualifies the claim by saying that, well, it actually, they weren't even talking about the unmarked graves at Kamloops because that hadn't come out yet when the TRC made its findings, but it talked about potential deaths, that kind of thing. And so he said there was nothing wrong with it. And he dismissed the appeal. He said there was nothing wrong with what the judge said. Bye-bye. The sentence is already served, gone. So I remembered how the court said otherwise. And I saw that Court of Appeal decision, came down July 22nd. Somehow I happened to notice it. And I thought, this is wrong. This is like inconsistent. And maybe for all we know, the lawyer that went to the Court of Appeal, maybe he was emboldened by taking the course. Maybe the course had misled him. Maybe he sincerely thought that they had found these 215 kids or bodies. So I wrote to the Law Society privately, respectfully, not grandstanding or anything like that, saying, hey guys, are you aware of this decision? Are you aware of what happened in the Court of Appeal? This does not comport with the training. Take a look at it. And I couldn't imagine that if they were to do that sincerely, they'd do anything but change the training. Just a couple of sentences. Add the word potential and take out that this confirms what the band had known all along. Simple. They didn't get back to me. So I wrote them the decision, the Court of Appeal decision came down July 22nd last year. I wrote them on July 26th. They didn't get back to me. I actually wrote them twice that day because I wanted my email to be very clear, and I noticed that there was something that was a little vague about it. So I wrote them 2 emails on that day. Heard nothing. August 1st, I wrote them again, said, what's going on? You say on your website, the Law Society's website, under the course section, that this is how we communicate with you. You'll get back to us. This is how we communicate with you. And so that's on August 1st, I wrote to them, and they did write back that time. I got an auto reply saying, you'll hear from us in 2 days. All right. I didn't. So on August 9th, I wrote them again. Now, in the interim, there had been new kind of frisson, new threats that were being advanced by Elia Gazan, who is this partly Indigenous member of Parliament. I think she's NDP from Manitoba. And she was tabling a motion, or had tabled a motion in Parliament, to have any skepticism about any of the narrative about anything to do with residential schools, classified as a criminal offense, classified as hate speech that could even ultimately attract imprisonment. Now, this is all wrong. It's going in the wrong direction. So I brought that to the Law Society's attention. My fourth email. I said, "This is like in this climate. It's all the more important that we're accurate and correct about these things. So could you please A, get back to me, and B, tell me what you're going to do about this. You should change the training. Simple." Anyways, they didn't get back to me again. So at that point, I thought, well, there's nothing left to do but to bring this to the membership. And I was quite sensitive to the fact that of that criticism I'd received on the earlier resolution, which was kind of not the Law Society's business. So I'm really just trying to affirm a principle. It's kind of like a marginal use of a resolution, but it's done. It's not unheard of. But this was different. This is the Law Society's domain, and it made perfect sense to bring to the membership and have the membership tell the Law Society, look, we should change this. Because, well, we have an obligation to protect the judiciary, if nothing else. We have an obligation to keep things as accurate as possible. Um, that judge, Fitzpatrick, would she ever write a ruling the same way again if she knew that she was going to be attacked in court and called names and all? Maybe not. And maybe other judges would take note from that as well. So anyways, brought the resolution. So, okay, I'll tell you the timing on this. So August 19th is deadline. We filed the resolution. August 23rd, the Law Society opens a portal. And in the portals for discussion for lawyers only to debate various resolutions. They open the portal and they put up our resolution. There's some other resolutions as well. Like there was one resolution as to whether or not lawyers should continue to wear gowns for certain things. There was a resolution as to whether or not, I don't know if that was it, or the resolution as to whether or not call ceremonies should be in person, that kind of thing. So the Law Society put up its own comment. The executive director of the Law Society put up his own comment underneath a resolution that gets pinned. It's like the most prominent one. And in it, he said, we're always open to feedback on the course, which is ironic because he didn't acknowledge the fact that I wrote them 4 times without getting any feedback, and that's why we were here now. He didn't even touch that, but he said, we're always open to feedback. Here's the email address. Write to us. And then he also said, nobody ever said that the course was set in stone. It's always up for revision and review. And in fact, we're in the course of reviewing it now. We're particularly going to look at the unmarked graves part of the training, and the new revision, the new version of the course should be up by January 25. And then he also linked to the band's own statement on the 3rd anniversary of the May 27, 2021 claim from the band of the findings, the claim of the unmarked graves finding. And in their 3rd anniversary email, they basically said, hey, look, we are thank you very much for your support. We're doing our work to investigate this. We're doing it our way. We're talking to people. We're talking to knowledge keepers, and we're being sensitive to our own traditions. But we're doing whatever. And we really appreciate your support. We guarantee you that if we ever find anything, you'll be the first to know. Okay, it's after 3 years now. Funny. And then they also say it's something kind of like nasty, which feeds into, I think, where things go from here. They say that we appreciate your allyship, but we're well aware of the fact that we're getting questions. We get some questions that they're really nasty. They're based in white supremacy and colonial, some sort of pejoratives. I mean, you can just think of what they might be, all about colonialism, settler colonialism, that kind of thing. So basically, if you ask questions about what's going on, you fall into that category. So the Law Society now is putting up that letter, and they're kind of setting the tone without owning it themselves. They're saying, hey, look, we don't really appreciate this resolution, that kind of thing. Anyways, things go on. That's August 23rd. There's some debate in the portal. There's some people that support us, some people don't. They think that maybe that's untoward for us to be talking about anything because we're not Indigenous, the other lawyer and myself that brought the motion. Okay. So, anyways, on September, the AGM itself is going to be on September 24th. On September 9th, the BC First Nations Justice Council puts out their own press release, and they're very damning. They call us denialists. They say they're very harmful, just some other pejoratives, and it's really quite nasty. That's their press release, basically encouraging lawyers to vote against our resolution. And the resolution, remember, just add the word potential and just clarify this training a little bit. Anyways, the very damning resolution. The next day, September 10th, the Law Society comes out with its own press release. And what it does is it adopts the BC First Nations press release from the day before. They link to that, and which they describe as calling us racist. And then they go on and they say that our resolution is vexatious, frivolous, unnecessary. And I guess the implication there is it's unnecessary because we're always looking at this anyways. And we're going to change it. We're going to change it. Just trust that we're taking care of these things. And also, they said that the resolution just highlights the fact that there's a lot of racism in the profession. Well, I might not be the sharpest tool in the box, but I can put two and two together. I mean, if that resolution shows that there's a lot of racism in the profession, that means that the other lawyer and myself, Mark Berry and I, must be racist because we're the ones that it's our words, it's our resolution. Anyways, we go on. We have the AGM. We did better at this AGM than I did in the other resolution, by the way. We got like about 47+% of the vote.
Plus, a whole lot of people abstained.
Yes, that's right, which says a lot. I mean, you really, it does. But so I guess that means that even in spite of the Law Society's warning that we consider anybody that's going to vote for this resolution racist, which is the only fair inference I think you could draw from that, nonetheless, about half of the lawyers agreed. Just change it. For God's sake, just change it. Anyways, so that happened. And Mark and I were really upset about that resolution. I got to say, I was in Japan at the time. So my wife and I went to Japan in September. And when I saw the press release, that's what I was upset about, not the resolution. When I saw the press release, first on September 9th, and then September 10th, the Law Society jumping on the bandwagon and just really kind of amplifying this menacing nature of the resolution, I was scared. You know, I was scared about it. Oh man, what's going to happen? I was aware of like some of the vandalism and the arson that that the whole story itself had generated for years now. And I don't want to get too much into that, but I legitimately I turned to my wife and I apologized. I said, Lori, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I've kind of brought this upon ourselves. I had no idea that the Law Society would take that tack. Maybe I should have thought. I didn't think they would do anything. Anyways, I've got something interesting to say about what they even put out the press release. But let me just catch us up fast, and I'll be finished in another minute, and then I'll shut up. So here's what happened. I wrote them. Mark and I wrote the Law Society. We hired a lawyer, wrote them a demand letter demanding that they apologize and that they take down the press release, which is still there on their website. This is still there to be seen. They refused. And so then I proceeded with a defamation suit. And that's kind of where we're at. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, yeah. So this is an interesting tidbit. So we filed their defamation suit. They sent back a long, rambling, 45-page, dissembling, highly irrelevant, highly prejudicial, continuing in its defamation answer. And one of the things they said in that answer, this is quite something. They said that Advanced voting had already started on September 6th. Remember, the AGM was September 24th. They said that advanced voting had started on September 6th. And they thought it was important that they somehow impact that voting. They couldn't let it just be. They needed to get the word out that we were racist and that this resolution should not be supported. So it's like, it's not, they had no choice. They had to put out the press release. I think that's incredible. They were not content to allow the membership to vote their conscience, to vote their own understanding. They couldn't trust the lawyers to just do whatever. They couldn't trust the process, that they could have continued to speak in this members portal. And in fact, what they did, they shut down the members portal. So they ginned up the kind of antagonism against us, which caused some lawyers to feel kind of more I don't know. I'm thinking you could just see the portal got angrier against us after their press release came out. And then they used that as an excuse to say, well, things are intemperate here, so we're going to shut down the debate portal. So the actual facility that was open for us to properly debate this, they shut down. They left their press release out there for the whole world to see. They weren't just like sending the press release to however many thousand lawyers are in British Columbia. They sent it out to like 8 billion people, as far as I'm concerned. And so that's where we stand. So I sued them for defamation. You don't call people racist just because you don't agree with them about something. That's it, I think.
Well, it sounds like they wanted your resolution defeated, and they published material that would give the people who might vote for being clear that there's potential bodies, that there aren't actual bodies that have been discovered yet. That seemed innocuous. It might just pass. So they didn't want it passed. So therefore, they declared you to be a racist. I'm presuming. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. If there were other bodies, non-Indigenous bodies that were alleged to have been buried somewhere, would you insist that maybe somebody should dig them up and find out for sure?
Yeah.
I thought so. So, therefore, they could have called you a fascist, Jim. And I'm not going to bother asking you whether or not you support Adolf Hitler. I'm pretty sure you don't. However, they were name calling. So, you're suing them. Is there any other record? Has anybody sued the BC Law Society, their own law society, before, a lawyer?
Not that I'm aware of. It might have happened. That's a really interesting question. I'm going to look into it. Normally, people get chastised by the law society. They get disciplined. They get. You were talking about Kerry Linda. Well, that was kind of Kerry's position. He was defending himself against accusations within the law society. This is a little different. What it is? It's like the narrative. One of the things that was complained about often in the portal while it existed, some lawyers, woke lawyers, I would say, they faulted us. I alluded to this earlier. They said, it's not, why are you talking about this? This isn't your story. This is an Indigenous story. What I'm thinking is that if I was an Indigenous lawyer, and there are many, and an Indigenous lawyer could have brought the same resolution. In fact, maybe I should have found an Indigenous lawyer to co-sign it with me. No offense, Mark, but Mark's not Indigenous, right? But the thing is that,
but is that playing into
of
identity
course it
politics?
is. I'm not being facetious. I'm talking about what strategically might have worked, because
Okay.
it would have disarmed them. Because one of their complaints was that this isn't our story. We don't own this. The unmarked graves claim is a tragic, world-class trauma, injustice, tragedy that's owned by the Indigenous Canadians, nobody else. And I really take issue with that. We all own this story. Those who are somehow connected to the dominant culture is being blamed for those. If they're not mass graves, We got to think in terms of mass murder. I mean, they're talking about like murdered clandestine kids who were clandestine graves of murdered children. So we all own the story. We all have a stake in the story. That's something that I think. And the Law Society's basic position, and this is reflected thematically throughout their 45-page rambling response, is that we don't. Is that it's not my story. It's not mine to say. I should just shut up and listen. Eyes to the ground, uh, just adopt the shame, that kind of thing. Well, that doesn't interest me. I don't believe in that. I would not do that. I will not do that.
Well, yeah, what you're saying reminds me of that professor from the University of Manitoba, Sean Carleton, who says that any evidence that calls for evidence, I should say, to value the Indigenous experience. Uh, Whoa. Does that mean that with Indigenous experience, background, can say anything I want and I don't have to refer to any evidence? It's beyond being evidence-based?
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. Hey, Lloyd, have you ever interacted with this Sean guy? And I speak of him with some disdain. I have no respect for that person. But anyways, he is an academic, and he's very prominent on the landscape of this issue. Have you interacted with him at all?
No, I have not.
So there's a recent CBC article, I think it was like March 20th, that's all about residential school denialism and defining it. And he's featured in that article. Basically, he says that it's any any questions, any assertions, any inquiry, it's all ours, it's all Indigenous, and anybody that questions that is a denialist. That's where he's setting that bar. That's ridiculous. And, I'm Jewish, and I actually did lose a lot of family, or extended family for the most part, in the Holocaust. And I know what denialism is. Denialism is a perverse, unreasonable, irrational, um, and black-hearted, I would think, often refusal to accept basic facts. That's not what's going on here. I mean, we know right off the bat that Sarah Boyer, the woman that did the GPR assessment, that said that, hey, look, I think that there are 215 probable graves in this old apple orchard. She immediately resiled down to 200. She drew that down to 200 when it was brought to her attention that 15 of those had already been investigated under a separate, I think it was Simon Fraser University, did some sort of archaeological assessment for some other purpose. And they knew that 15 of those weren't that. I think they were part of this grand old skeptic system from the 1920s. What I would really like to know is, how are those 15 impressions any different from the other 200 impressions? But Sarah is nowhere to be found. Her report is nowhere to be seen. We've never seen it. This is like crazy. This is ludicrous. They offered, initially the band said, we're going to provide a report. They didn't say whether or not it was a written report. I would assume that it was, but we don't know one way or the other. There's certainly nothing. And she's disappeared from view. Not available for interview. Murray Sinclair jumped in right off the bat when the RCMP wanted to talk with her. I mean, of course, that's the only natural step to be done. Of course, they'd want to talk with her. Murray Sinclair intervened at that time, said, no, wait a sec, I don't like the way the RCMP is talking with her. She was nervous or something. And so, because Canada was so susceptible to the shock and the guilt and the shame of this claim, that I believed it 100% right at the outset. Why would I think otherwise? We said, okay, fine. Then take the RCMP out of the picture, and you investigate. And that's where things were left right off the bat. But we don't hear from Sarah Boya. We don't hear from the band. We hear nothing. It's years later. We're coming up on the 4th anniversary. May 27th, 2025 is going to be the fourth anniversary. What is the band's announcement going to be this year? That's what I'm really quite curious to see what they're going to say this time. Are they going to double down that much further on the horrific denialism? Are they going to call me names now? Are they going to call you names, Lloyd?
Oh, they could. They could, but we don't need to get into that now. But
Sorry. Okay.
but, no, there are all kinds of examples of minority status does not give you protection from this kind of narrative.
Right.
Did you read my article about Richard Biltzko and his suicide? He's gay. He happened to be a principal in both Canada and the United States, and he
Yeah.
was made to conduct to attend a DI session, a DEI. I would pronounce that
Yeah.
DEI session with the Toronto Public School Board, and he challenged the assertion of the instructor that Canada was more racist than the United States because he had experience in both countries as a principal, and he was called a denialist. He was called a racist, and he lost his position as with the Toronto Public School Board. And not only that, after he lost his position, the hounding continued, and he committed suicide.
Wow.
And so there's consequences to these kinds of. Hey, with regard to the residential school system, the allegation that residential schools were created to murder children, that doesn't make any sense, really. You don't create a school to murder children, to conduct genocide, but nonetheless, that's part of a narrative out there. And as a result, when the rumor was that all these bodies had been, a mass grave had been found near Kamloops, why? There were churches being vandalized. Over 100 were vandalized or set on fire. These are consequences of what used to be called rumors.
Yeah, I know. So, how about this? Eventually, I mean, as I said, I think I put this in. It was one of my comments on in the discussion board. In the future, a few things are going to be true. I mean, like a few years from now, either they will have excavated, they will finally have excavated at least one of the 215 suspected graves, and they either will have found that, lo and behold, there is actually remains of a person there, and then that will lead to who knows whatever else it leads to, or else they will excavate and they'll find that there's nothing there, or else they won't do anything. We'll be another 5 years down the road and nothing will have happened. And these are all interesting things to think about because there's no other alternatives. One of those three things is going to happen. Now, if they don't do anything further, then what Canada has done and what the law has acquiesced to is abandoning anything to do with truth seeking. Science is by the wayside. I mean, we're into nothing but narrative, identity politics. I mean, you could go to town on the horrible ramifications of that. On the other hand, so that happens. That's what happens if they don't actually excavate. If they excavate and they do find bodies, then wow. I mean, now we're onto a whole line of inquiry that what are we waiting for? Like, who the hell did this? What happened? I mean, who are these kids? We don't know of any kids. There are no names. Nobody's saying, where is this person with this particular name? They didn't come home. Where are they? Could they be in that apple orchard? We don't have those names, but nonetheless, they find bodies. They've got to be someone. And so we're into this whole incredible path of inquiry. It's forensic. Bring the police back into the picture. The courts now do what they're supposed to do with this stuff. Or they excavate and they find nothing. That is what I suspect is going to happen. I've done a lot of reading about this now. I've been compelled to. I'm Jewish, and I care a lot about what's been happening in Israel and Palestine and all of that. Gaza. Um, but I've had to kind of spend a lot of time learning about this issue because I'm also embroiled in it, obviously. And I'm learning a lot about it. And at this point, I think that there are no bodies in that field at all. I could be wrong. But if they find that there are no bodies there, then don't we have to self-reflect on what have we done? How horrible and reckless and traumatizing is that for young Indigenous kids? I can imagine if you're an Indigenous kid now, you're like 10 years old, 11, and you now have heard this story for 4 years now, not five, 4 years. You are going to have a certain perspective of the Canadian history and Canadian culture and all of that that's so damning and so bleak and so mistrustful, deservedly. I mean, we're like the Cambodian killing fields with snow, or something like that. But that's horrible. That needs to be rectified. And I mean, what an opportunity for true. Here's a concept. How about something like, I know, I'm going to coin a term here: truth and reconciliation. How does that sound? Truth and reconciliation. Does that have a good sound to it? We could do something new. We could have something like an actual process of truth and reconciliation to truly kind of clarify our history, to promote the ideals and the norms that we all can respect, which includes proper search for truth and accountability and all that. And we can have the rightful apologies, but not just reckless virtue signaling, genuflecting to some sort of DEI gods. You can say DEI too, because that's like plural for gods in Latin. So that kind of works. But but that's what would happen in the third alternative. The third alternative, they find nothing. Then we get into the real truth and reconciliation. I think we need TRC too.
Yeah. Well, Jim, what you're saying is what you're describing is an enlightenment search for truth, which means enlightenment search for what the facts are. You want to
Yeah.
establish what the facts are. But if the truth is already known, you're part of a cult once, you know all about this. If there's a narrative and the narrative is presumed to give the truth,
Right.
then the whole process is changed, isn't it?
Okay. So the cult that I was in told us that God is like this universal kind of incredible blissful consciousness, and the only thing that's blocking it for us individuals is our minds. So we have to, our ego, our minds have to be suppressed. You have to go through this incredible inner journey, where you actually kind of enslave your mind. You surrender your mind to Guru Maharaja. You look like an idiot to the outside world, but inside you've just gone to nirvana. That's what you want to do with the human mind. I don't believe that anymore. And I don't think that the law society or the legal profession operates on that principle. I think that we have a different understanding of what our minds are. We
Well,
actually respect, well, we should, anyways,
maybe
respect.
maybe in most legal cases, the law society operates on a more enlightenment principle, but it seems to me that when it comes to this particular narrative that holds that Canada is evil and that I don't know if there's still a statue to John A. Macdonald still standing in the country. Most, if not all of them, have been taken down.
Yeah,
Uh, that's the narrative that we're supposed to accept. And if you don't accept that narrative, then Jim, you're a racist.
I know. Crazy, huh? It's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's total Kurt Vonnegut territory. We're in some sort. I wish Kurt Vonnegut was still alive. He was the first guy I ever read when I was a young, impressionable teenager. I read, Cat's Cradle, Catch 20. No, that's Joseph Heller. He was the second guy I read. But like, it's unimaginable kind of. It's like we're in science fiction territory where the law society, the law has kind of drifted into this cult mentality. You're right. It is like a cult. And thanks for bringing up the cult that I was once in, because there are parallels, and that's not an exaggeration. Once you eschew logic and you eschew facts, you're not lawyer like. You're religious.
the you've had experience with actually you in being the plural you in BC, BC lawyers have had
Yeah.
experience with die there where people have been disciplined. I'm recalling you got a fellow lawyer named Adrian Smith, uh,
Yeah.
who as I recall, had was doing a die session, and it was for some government organization, and and a participant dared ask a question that said, "Well, look, maybe it's important for some people to in some contexts to know what a person's sex is as opposed to gender." Uh,
Right.
the individual in question was disciplined, was forced. I don't think he was fired. He was forced to take retraining. Uh, that's how forcing somebody to take retraining to change their thinking about something because their thinking is not correct. That's cultism, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is dangerous questions. So in that case, I'm aware of that case, and there, um, it was the ombudsperson's office of all places. So
Yeah.
this is a training for ombuds, and what do you call them? Ombudspersons. um, to do their work most effectively. And it was a training to deal, I think, with trans related issues and stuff. And he respectfully at the end of the session said, I get a lot from what you're saying, but I do have some questions about some of the conventional, traditional women's only spaces. Like, where do you draw the line? And at that point, Adrian Smith jumped down his throat and said, "Sorry, this is not something we're not going to have like a nice, reasonable, civil discussion about this. Not when transgender people are dying. No way." And this kind of struck a chord in the I guess in the minds of all of his other office mates that were attending there. And the next thing you know, he's hearing from his boss that they're afraid to work with you now. You were stigmatized at this session, and now the only way that you can atone is if you submit yourself to some sort of a retraining session, a sensitivity training. So he did that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Uh, in 2003, Steven Pinker uh, noted that he called it a quasi-religion or proto-religion that was developing. This was like 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago.
Right.
And he said that the three myths that this quasi-religion was based on were the blank slate, the noble savage, and the ghost in the machine. Uh, and these three myths together seem to describe what we're talking about. The blank slate is that there's no inherent talents or temperaments that we have and accordingly our language controls our worldview and shapes it, and therefore we can change people's worldview by changing their use of language. Well, that's your experience with regard to the court orders with regard to having to state your correct gender. Um,
And it's a total repudiation of evolutionary psychology. Like
that's
you
right.
put evolutionary psychology in the trash bin
Yeah,
if you
in absolute contradiction to that. But hey, when we're dealing with a religious cult, it doesn't have to be internally coherent. It just has to be
right.
accepted. And in contrast to that, there's also the notion that there's what Pinker calls a ghost in the machine. It means that we're born with something, and when we're born, the doctors and our own parents might, for example, get our gender wrong. So that's not a blank slate. That means that there's something there, and we have to respect that. And then the noble savage. Well, we've been talking about that. That at one time there was a veritable Garden of Eden on this continent, and indigenous peoples shared that Garden of Eden in harmony with nature, and it was taken and stolen. This justifies tearing down not just statues, it justifies tearing down the civilization that we have here. Uh,
Yeah, really. So, Lloyd, I said at the outset that like I've been naturally kind of drawn into learning more about the Indigenous history and of British Columbia and Canada, and I've been reading a fair bit of stuff. And in fact, when some news came out about my lawsuit, I heard from this guy. His name is Robert Janney, incredible guy, who he's just kind of a self-motivated amateur historian, and he said, "Can I send you this book that I've written?" I said, "Sure." So he sends me this beautiful hardcover book. It's really big, and it's called "The World We Share," "The History We Share," something like that. And the it's about the history of colonialism and the missionaries and the establishment of what was not the Catholic Church on Vancouver Island, but the Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church here in Vancouver Island. And it's all source documents, so he doesn't insert his own voice into anything. It's all just letters and journals and newspaper reports of the day and stuff. And one of the things, I mean, I know don't know that much about it. I'm not from BC. I'm from Ontario initially, and that's my excuse. Anyways, so I'm learning now, and one of the things he's talking about is how horribly violent some of the internecine warfare was between various bands and tribes. They're just slaughtering each other left, right, and center. Nobody really talks about that much, but he tells us one story that I just want to share. It's kind of incredible. So it takes place in Nanaimo, and there's a prominent missionary that's going to be there, and he's holding a big kind of rally for lots and lots of First Nations that have already converted to Christianity. So he's a Methodist, and I think his name was Mears, and he's going to have this big rally, and it's in Nanaimo. And at one point, there are these 70 war canoes that come into Nanaimo Harbor from another band. I can't remember the name of the band, but they were notorious for being like the most dangerous, the most brutal of all the bands. So the Nanaimo natives freak out, and they go back to their homes, and they get their weapons, and they run down to the beach to be able to defend themselves from these guys that are coming. This is going to be like just outright war. But the thing is that the guys on the canoes themselves have already converted to Christianity. And so they're just coming to see this prominent missionary. But they see that these Nanaimo guys think otherwise, and they've come down with their weapons. So what do? What do you think they do, Lloyd? How do they stave off this war?
well, I guess they would take out their own weapons.
No, one of them brilliantly thought, here's what we do: we do the sign of the cross, and then they'll realize that we're Christian now too, and that's what they did. So you got all these guys in the war canoe doing this. But wait a sec, that's not Methodist, that's Catholic. But that's what they did. Anyways, they do the sign of the cross. The guys in Nanaimo all recognize that they're coming in peace, that they're Christian, and then they join this big rally. I thought it was a fascinating story. That's all.
Well, it is true that that Aboriginal societies were divided on the basis of tribes. It was tribal societies, and they were xenophobic,
Right.
and that was you didn't trust the people you did not know,
Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
that was a survival mechanism. Okay, back to this. So
Yeah.
what 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 led you to getting out of the cult that you were in? What you had some status there. You were there for almost a decade. Uh, what enlightened you to go in a different direction?
So I didn't really have much status there. I was a rank and file member.
Okay.
I'm a musician. They'd ship me around to different cities, so I wrote songs for the cult Guru Maharaji, and I would do that. But over time, I just the promise never fulfilled itself. I didn't become enlightened. I didn't become some sort of, I didn't live in a state of nirvana. The world that I left behind started to look more and more alluring to me. Relationships, responsibility in the world, really using my mind, that kind of thing. So it was a natural thing, natural development for me to actually finally capitulate to my doubts and really give them some license and exercise them and think, what about that? What about the fact that Maraji made various predictions that never came true? And I started to see his limitations, and one thing led to another. So one day I went to a meeting of the cult leader's brother was there trying to. It was a big meeting. He was trying to get people to give money to Maraji's new jet that he wanted to buy, and I questioned him. I said, we were told that your brother was God, God in human form. Let's not downplay that, right? Let's talk about that. And he says, well, that's what we were told when we were kids. And I thought, well, that's kind of a funny answer. Anyways, long story short, I told him I was a lawyer. He suddenly took interest in that because I now had a little bit of status in the world. So he came to my office the next day. We went downstairs to the Red Robin. We talked. And he told me that I said, look, I shouldn't be talking to you. I should be talking to your brother, the cult leader, Maharaji. And but he said that I've myself have tried to ask him questions and he won't answer them. And I thought, that's it. That was a nail in the coffin. And I walked him out to his very expensive Mercedes, said goodbye to him, and that was it. I never looked back. And then I later, when I got online, I started the ex-Premi internet scene with a couple other guys, and that was good information clearinghouse. But another thing that I think we really should talk about is some of the overflow of what's happened with my lawsuit has happened in the BC legislature. And are you aware of that? Are you aware Dallas Brody is an
Yeah.
MLA?
She was
Dallas,
about to drive by her former party leader. She was the attorney general critic, no less.
yeah, she was the AG critic. And somehow she noticed the defamation suit. I'd never talked with her, never met her before, but she thought that it was meritorious, and she mentioned it somehow in the legislature. The fact is that they have not. Almost 4 years later, they haven't unearthed any bodies. She said, "How many have they unearthed?" She's being rhetorical. She said the answer is zero. Anyways, that attracted all sorts of flack. She ultimately gets kicked out of the Conservative Party. Two other MLAs have also left, and so the three of them, I think, caucus together. And what we have is several Indigenous leadership groups, because there are many, have joined together, putting out threatening press releases saying that we should go ahead with criminalizing residential school denialism. And they mentioned Dallas particularly. And even yesterday in the legislature, she actually questioned. She rose and as an independent now, and questioned this whole narrative. And the AG stood up and defamed her further and said she didn't know what she was talking about. Nobody's threatening to criminalize her or throw her in jail. But if you just look at the banned leadership press releases, that's in fact what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
Where does this go? This is just crazy. It's just crazy, crazy, crazy. It's like such a fork in the road. Either they're stuck, whatever happens with my lawsuit, I hope that they do the right thing. Every day is another day that they could say, you know what, we're sorry. We've really we've reflected further on this. Our client, their lawyer could be saying, our client recognizes that they should not have called you those names, and they apologize. Will you accept the apology? And depending on the nature of the apology, I might, but I'm actually asking for that. And that could happen, or maybe they'll find some sort of procedural technique to stem this inquiry and and search for justice. But whatever happens with me, this issue's got to be resolved. Either we care about the truth and facts or we don't. And the truth and facts are what they are. With the trans thing, it's interesting. People can have different perspectives on gender, what that is. I mean, I have my own views on. We don't need to get into that, but it's a little bit more nuanced. Actually, I don't think it is, but some people do, and there are arguments for that. There's nothing nuanced about what in the world is there where that GPR person said that I think that there's a grave there. There either is or there isn't. Deal with it. I mean, it's incredible. It's got to happen, doesn't it? It's got to happen. I mean, we can't go another 20 years, 40 years, 500 years into the future. And what, Canada's going to continue to give millions and millions and millions to the Kamloops band for security. That's what it's going to be for. It's going to be nothing to kind of put up a permanent wall around the apple orchard so that nobody could dare jump over the wall with a shovel, and actually explore. I mean, so much money has been given to the band. I've heard different estimates, but one of them I've heard that seems to be well-founded is that they've been given over $12 million to actually do the investigation that should have been the RCMP's work to begin with. But where are the fruits of that labor? What labor? So anyways, this is a phenomenal situation, and it's so important. So anybody that doesn't recognize the importance of this isn't paying attention to the extent to which, I mean, in the wake of the Kamloops claim, there's been a power realignment in Canada where we have different provinces, and federally we have deferred power to the bands. Even within the Law Society, the Law Society is restructured in a way. This is being tested in the courts right now, but they're taking away our autonomy, and they're giving a large portion of our control to the First Nations. And you can't tell me that isn't partly attributable to the horrible shame that we bear on the presumption that we're responsible for 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops. And one of the things that the people like Sean Carlton say when they try to sidestep this, they say, well, look, it's residential school denialism itself to focus on that. Like, why? That shouldn't be the only issue. Like, maybe there aren't any bodies there, but so what? No, sorry, dude. That's not going to fly. This was the claim that seared the international public attention, the imagination of the world. This was the claim that immediately precipitated our prime minister dropping our flags across the country for months. This was the claim that led to 22 lawyers in the band marching off to the International Criminal Court and trying to have Canada designated as a genocidal country. This was the claim. This is interesting. Before the claim, before May 27, 2021, there was some effort to have Canada join UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations for the Rights of Indigenous Persons, which is a real compromise of sovereignty. It's handing over some sovereignty to this United Nations body. And it didn't fly in Canada. Some provinces were on board, some provinces weren't. Once the Kamloops claim came out, I don't know if all of them, but at least a majority now gone on board with UNDRIP, and Canada joined UNDRIP. There have been lots and lots of consequences to this claim. But don't we want to know? Aren't there Indigenous guys in Kamloops saying, God, I'd like to know, Hey, Joe, what do you think? I don't know, Mike. What do you think? Do you really?
Well, here's the answer, and I don't think anybody's saying that the residential schools were a great idea. I don't think that's in question. I don't think you're saying that residential schools were.
I'm not saying that. I don't know, but I be presumptuous.
However, you are asking for some facts to be known.
Yeah.
And what we're dealing with is people who believe that they already have the true narrative, and therefore the facts should be found that support that narrative, which is different from saying we need to find out what's happening so we can know what the true what the truth is. It's a polar opposite. So, from your experience in cults, how can we challenge people who have been seduced into believing this narrative?
Great question.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so once we started expremi.org and we got into like these ongoing roiling debates and discussions and arguments with ongoing cult members, because there's still a lot of people, aging cult members, were like the Shakers are dying off, but they're still following Guru Maharaji years and years later. And we get in these discussions. And what we tried to do was we tried to kind of flesh out the facts. Like, for example, there was facts about Maharaji's chronic alcoholism that was hidden from the membership. And we would have evidence, we'd have testimonials, and we'd try to get these people to talk with us rationally. And here's what happened. Those that did eventually, not immediately, but eventually, they would turn the corner and they'd start trusting their own rational process. And some of those, it sometimes could take a couple of years, they would actually extricate themselves from the cult. Others, they had this incredible hard shell patina. So it looked like they were rationally engaging with us, but they weren't really. Like they were just kind of offering an endless litany of spurious arguments. And I mean, so they were kind of playing the game of rational discussion, but they weren't really doing the inquiry, the real inquiry. So we need to just get back to the basic principles of what makes humans special. Our minds. We think about things. It's the biggest thing in the world. That sounds so trite. I'm almost embarrassed to have said what I just said, but it's true. We're at that level. And lawyers of all people, like what an incredible thing. You know, you see these little kids and they get inquiry minds. And what do their parents say? The little 5-year-old kid, he's got some precocious question at the dinner table. And so the father proudly turns to their guests and says, "He should be a lawyer." All they're really saying, they're not talking about the money that the kid's going to make, because you don't necessarily make that much money. But they're talking about the fact that the kid's got an inquiring mind. It's a healthy thing, you know. It should be respected. And the Law Society should be respecting that, I think, and not playing these games. Silly bugger.
Thank you for that closing remark. I think we'll have to end now. We've gone well over the hour, and this has been a good interview. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. I am sure that you've enjoyed listening to my conversation with lawyer and activist Jim Heler. The New Enlightenment Project is committed to increasing civil discussion of difficult or controversial topics, and we offer a series of podcasts to further that aim. You can visit our website at nep-Humanism.ca to browse our blog or to become a member or make a donation. We are also on Facebook. You can catch our podcasts and webinars at YouTube at nep-Humanism.ca.